What is going on, Hive Warriors? So today in this video, we're going to talk about the 4 stages that take place when doing intermittent fasting, just so that you can get a better understanding. Now, I've mentioned these stages before, but this video will be dedicated to literally talking about each one and the chronological order in which they happen. Without any further ado, let's jump right into it. All right, so the first stage of intermittent fasting after eating, obviously eating is, you eat first, right? The first stage is the post-absorptive stage. Now, what this means is that your body is no longer absorbing the foods that you've eaten for their nutrients, for all that stuff. It's already done that, and now it's in a post position after absorbing the food. So when it's in this position, it's going to start the process, which is stage 2 of glucose depletion. Now, glucose is something that builds up. It stays in your body as glycogen. It actually carries weight as well. It has a percentage of water on it, so it carries weight. So the more glycogen that you have in your body, the more you weigh. But that's quick energy that your body can use. It stores glycogen inside muscle tissues in different parts of your body, so that your body could grab it at any time for energy, immediate energy. So, for example, even if you were working out, if you were bench pressing, you could get glucose can trigger, or glycogen can trigger quick energy that goes right into your muscle when it needs it right then and there, as opposed to waiting even whatever amount of time it takes for your body fat to send the energy to the specific locations. Glycogen works as some sort of a substitute to body fat for quick energies, the carbohydrate energy. That's why when you're running, you're burning through carbohydrate, but when you're walking, you're burning through the majority of what you're burning is fat, as opposed to when you're running, the majority of what you're burning is carbohydrate, because you need that quick energy for all the stuff that's going on when running. But because you're walking and it's more leisurely and it's more relaxed and calm, you can use predominantly body fat. So glycogen is just so that you could have quick energy, but it's being depleted throughout the day, right? So you get to a point, that's stage 2, you get to a point where you completely deplete it, and now we move on to stage 3, which is the metabolic switchover. Now, this is called the metabolic switchover, coined by Dr. Stephen Anton. This is when you no longer have glycogen in the body. You've depleted all your glycogen, and the only way to replenish glycogen is by eating again. But because you didn't eat, you don't replenish the glycogen. So what ends up happening is you go into a stage of using a substitute for glycogen. This is that metabolic switchover, and when this metabolic switchover happens, your body purposely uses body fat for fuel. The way it does it is it takes the fatty acids outside of the fat cell, outside of the adipocyte shrinks, it breaks up the triglycerides, puts it through the bloodstream, sends it to the liver. From the liver, it gets turned into ketones, and then it gets sent out to the brain to provide your body with energy. Now, this process, when it goes through the liver and turns into ketones, is called the beta hydroxybutyrate process. And that process allows for your body to have something to use as a quick energy, as opposed to using using glucose that no longer is available. Now, fat is still used in a normal way. Just if you're at a caloric deficit and all that stuff, it's still used for that as well. But your body fat is also being used to power your brain. So that's where you get that edge, or that discrepancy between people that just do caloric restriction and people that do intermittent fasting. Now, there's going to be people out there that's going to tell you intermittent fasting isn't magic. There's no way that if calories are the same, everything. They're neglecting the entire element of glucose buildup, glycogen buildup, and glycogen depletion, and the replacement of that glycogen. If they took that into account, which is simply science, it's not magic, it's science, they would understand that there's a heavy calorie partitioning where, even if it's not rooted in simply using body fat for fuel in the sense of being at a caloric deficit, it is also using body fat to replace glucose. That's what gives it the edge, and that's why we always see in meta-analysis and all these different studies, when nothing seems to be the same, when everything seems to be the same and there's no difference between the two, you still see a 3, a 4, a 5, or 6 pound difference in body fat in the intermittent fasting group. Although it's not numerically significant or statistically significant, it is visually significant, because 5 pounds of body fat is still a lot. It still covers a lot of area. So yeah, it's still an important thing that differentiates intermittent fasting with just doing caloric restriction. Now, granted, you still need to be in a caloric restriction because you'll replenish all that body fat simply by being at a caloric surplus if you aren't in a caloric restriction. But nonetheless, when one for one, intermittent fasting always has an edge with burning body fat over simply being in a caloric restriction. And then there is an additional stage that does take place during fasting, and it all depends on how fat adapted you are. The cool thing about doing intermittent fasting consistently is that you become more fat adapted, and the more fat adapted that you become, the more you transition over, and the more you could be in that state of burning body fat for fuel or for ketone bodies, but not having to be going into the gluconeogenesis stage, which is where your body stops continuously using ketones and then also starts breaking down muscle for fuel. This is called glucose neogenesis. Now, in this stage, I highly recommend you stop fasting right before you hit glucose neogenesis, just so that you can be as efficient as possible, because you want to hold on to as much muscle as possible. You want to burn as much fat as possible. But for you to do that, you got to be within that grace period of getting the fat burned through that ketone, through that process of the beta hydroxybutyrate, turning your body fat into ketones, but then also stopping right before you get to the gluconeogenesis. So if you could do that, and that's stage 4, then you'll be perfectly fine. And obviously stage 5 is when you eat and you start the process all over again. Just keep in mind, for a lot of people, you can be using body fat for fuel and turn it into ketones without reporting or reading as being in ketosis. Being in ketosis and actually using your ketones, your body fat for ketones, are two different things, not fully separated, but you can be in that state where you're already doing the your body fat and ketones and switching that over from switching glucose to ketones without necessarily reading that you're in ketosis. Being in ketosis is a higher level of that, but you could already be doing that. So that's something, a misconception that a lot of people have. They feel that they need to be in ketosis before that ketone body stuff starts to take place, and that's not the case. Regardless of the fact, those are the 5 stages. You have the post-absorptive stage, you have the glucose depletion, the glycogen depletion, the metabolic switchover. Then you have the gluconeogenesis stage, where it's burning muscle for fuel to replace the ketones now, to try to give your brain a good amount of glucose, since your brain could only work off of 70% of the ketones. So it'll take ketones for a good amount of time, but then it'll say, hey, listen, I need glucose, and if you're not eating glucose after all this time, I'm gonna have to make it myself. And then that's when the body does glucose neogenesis. Unfortunately, if the brain could work off of 100% ketones, it would never have to do glucose neogenesis, but it doesn't. So that process will take place. You just got to be cognizant of when that happens for you. And then, of course, the 5th is eating again and starting the process all over. Hopefully this video has helped you guys. That is the 5 stages. That is why you see an edge for intermittent fasting in all of these studies, even if these other gurus are trying to tell you it's no difference. There's no benefit. There's no nothing. When you actually look at the numbers, it's always an edge. As long as protein is equated and physical activity is equated, there's always an edge, and calories. There's always an edge with intermittent fasting when it comes to the actual body fat loss. All right, until the next one, guys, peace out.